Welcome back to our program. Those of you regular listeners know that I try to read some emails from time to time, and I encourage emails, particularly those who disagree with me. I want to let you have your opinion on the show as we try to make some common sense out of some of these complicated issues. I had a fellow named Carl who emailed me last week. I believe he lives in Baton Rouge, which is my hometown, for those of you that don't know where our show emanates from. And in his email, he thought I was being inconsistent, maybe a little hypocritical, in stands on free speech that I'd taken on two issues we discussed here last week. One of the issues was that there was a candidate for the city council in a small community down in South Texas, right on the Mexican-U.S. border. She could not speak very good English. She spoke broken English, had some competence, but broken English. And she qualified to run for office, but the judge threw her out, saying she had to speak basic English if she was going to be a candidate. And I made the point that there's nothing in the Arizona Constitution, there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution, or any constitution in this country I know of, where a candidate is required to speak fluent English. That's a decision for the voters to make. Yes, there are some qualifications. You have to be an American citizen, you have to be a registered voter, and you've got to be 18 years old. In some instances, you can't be a convicted felon. You can if you run for Congress, U.S. Senator, even president, you can be a convicted felon. Otherwise, you can't be. Once those requirements are met, there's no requirements in Arizona or any place else that says you have to speak fluent English. Apparently, she spoke broken English. Felt like she could deal with her constituency. Her constituency, by the way, happens to be 98% Hispanic. So she felt she had no problem. Now, you can say, yes, but it's not fair to the rest of the city council members. Well, that's something I think the voters have a right to decide. If a voter wants someone with a handicap, if a voter wants someone who stutters, if a voter wants someone who's blind, if voters want someone that's mute that can't speak at all, that's their decision. And if Carl or the rest of us don't like that decision, then they have the right to run for public office themselves, or they have the right to support another candidate. Carl wrote to me and said that he sees these basic qualifications. He says, I do not think being able to communicate with city officials, fellow council members, and constituents should not a minimum requirement be to hold an office in a city in the United States. So your believing otherwise, me believing otherwise, is quite illogical. Carl, that's your decision. That's not the law, however. So you can run for the legislature and change the law. You can vote for candidates who want to change the law. But as long as that law is on the books, that's the way it should be. I'm not arguing that you're making this a free speech issue here. I'm not saying it's free speech. I'm saying it is a decision for the voters. I don't want some judge who in his wisdom takes away the rights for the voters to make that decision. I don't want a judge, like I said, tells me, well, the person's mute so they can't speak, so therefore you can't run for public office. That's my decision and your decision as voters to make that decision. And if you don't like it, again, you have some options to run for public office or support candidates who want to change that particular law. Now, the other issue that came up was the fact that I talked about a fellow out in California who is suing a city out there because he can't swear at an athletic event. Apparently, I don't know if he was arrested or what happened to him, but he said he did not have the right to holler and swear, use the F word, use whatever word he wanted in a public gathering, in a community gathering. And he felt like that was a violation of his freedom of speech. I don't. I think the Supreme Court has put some reasonable constraints on your right to speak. And I'm a big freedom of speech guy, and I've written about it at length on my website, where the government has crossed the line on many, many occasions. But in this instance, it's a question of public decency and community standards. And communities have been allowed to set standards that are reasonable, that don't cross the line. I don't think telling someone you can't sit out there and swear like a sailor in the middle of an athletic event when I've got my grandchild or my great-grandchild sitting there with me is an unreasonable restraint. The Supreme Court has said, for example, you can't stand up in a movie theater and holler fire because you'd be endangering a great number of other people. So these are tough issues. There's the balance there. In the question of one of these issues that Carl is getting on me about is freedom of speech. The other one, though, I think, is the right for the voters to decide. I think they're two different issues. If you agree with me, I'm glad. If you don't, I want to hear from you. Either way, I want to hear from you. You can email me right here at the station, jb@jimbrown.usa.com. We're here each week at this time just trying to make a little common sense and I'll continue to do so right after this message.